The Valorian Dominion had ruled the Orion arm of the galaxy for 12,000 years. They were an ancient species with technology so advanced that other civilizations looked like children playing with sticks and stones compared to them. Their warships were legendary. Each one was covered in layers of crystalline neutronium armor, a material so strong that no weapon in the known galaxy could scratch it. Plasma cannons bounced off their hulls. Nuclear warheads exploded against their shields without leaving a mark. Antimatter bombs, the most destructive weapons most species could create, did nothing more than scorch the paint on their ships. Because of this, the Valorians believed they were invincible. They had conquered hundreds of worlds across the galaxy. Species that resisted were destroyed. Species that surrendered became slaves. There was no third option. The Dominion did not negotiate. They did not compromise. They simply took what they wanted because no one could stop them. High Commander Zorath was a veteran of 63 conquest campaigns. He had personally overseen the subjugation of 11 different species. He was old even by Valorian standards, his exoskeleton scarred and weathered from centuries of warfare. But his mind was still sharp, and his cruelty was still legendary. When the scout vessels under his command detected strange radio signals coming from a small blue planet in an unremarkable solar system, he saw exactly what he always saw. An opportunity. The planet was called Earth by its inhabitants. The species living there called themselves humans. They were young, so incredibly young. Their first radio transmissions had only begun about a century and a half ago. They had achieved faster-than-light travel just 30 years before Zorath's scouts found them. Their entire fleet numbered fewer than 40 ships, all of them small and primitive by galactic standards. Zorath studied the intelligence, reports, and felt something close to amusement. These humans had no idea what was coming for them. They had never encountered another intelligent species. They had never faced a real enemy. They were like newborn animals stumbling around in a forest full of predators. Completely unaware of the danger they were in, he decided to handle this personally. Not because the humans were a threat, but because he was bored. Conquering advanced civilizations had become routine. Perhaps these primitives would provide some small entertainment before they were crushed. The eternal conquest. Zorath's personal battle cruiser dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the human solar system. It was a massive vessel, nearly 3 kilometers long, its hull gleaming with that distinctive crystalline armor that had never been breached. The ship carried enough firepower to glass an entire planet. Against a species as primitive as the humans, it was like bringing a fleet of warships to fight a single canoe. The humans detected them immediately. Their sensor technology was surprisingly good for such a young species. Within hours, a small group of human vessels moved to intercept the eternal conquest. Zorath watched them approach on his tactical display and felt that amusement again. There were only 5 ships, the largest one barely 300 meters long. They looked like toys compared to his cruiser. The lead human ship was called the USS Defiance. Its captain was a man named Daniel Hayes, a 52-year-old naval officer who had spent most of his life preparing for a war he never expected to fight. He was tall, with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen more than their share of violence. Before humanity reached the stars, Hayes had commanded vessels in 3 different conflicts on Earth. He knew what combat looked like. He knew what it meant to face an enemy that wanted to destroy everything you loved. But he had never faced anything like the eternal conquest. Lieutenant Maria Gonzalez sat at the communications station, her dark eyes fixed on her displays. She was young, only 28, but she was one of the best communications officers in the fleet. Her fingers moved across her console with practiced speed as she analyzed the incoming signals from the alien vessel. "Sir? They are hailing us," she said, her voice steady despite the fear she felt in her chest. Hayes nodded slowly. "Put it through." The main view screen flickered, and then the image of High Commander Zorath appeared. He was terrifying to look at. His body resembled a massive insect, standing over 2 meters tall, with a hard exoskeleton and mandibles that clicked together as he spoke. His eyes were compound like a fly's, and they seemed to look in every direction at once. When he spoke, the universal translator took a moment to convert his clicking speech into English. "Primitive beings," Zorath said, his voice filled with contempt. "I am High Commander Zorath of the Valorian Dominion. Your world and your species now belong to us. You will surrender unconditionally. You will disarm your vessels. You will present your leaders for judgment. Resistance is extinction. You have one of your solar cycles to comply." The transmission ended without waiting for a response. For a long moment, no one on the bridge spoke. Navigator Chris Palmer, a red-haired man in his 30s, stared at the blank view screen with his mouth hanging open. Weapons Officer Kevin Brooks, a muscular man with a shaved head and steady hands, gripped the edge of his console so hard his knuckles turned white. Chief Engineer Linda Martinez, a small woman with graying hair and the sharpest mind in the fleet, was already running calculations on her tablet. Captain Hayes stood in the center of the bridge, perfectly still. He looked at the image of the alien ship on the tactical display. He thought about his wife back on Earth. He thought about his daughter and his granddaughter. He thought about the billions of people who had no idea that their entire existence had just been threatened by a creature that saw them as nothing more than insects to be crushed. Then he thought about what it meant to be human. Humans had survived ice ages. They had survived plagues. They had survived wars that killed millions. They had clawed their way up from caves and mud to reach the stars. Every step of the way, something had tried to stop them, and every time, they had found a way to keep going. This would be no different. "Maria," Hayes said quietly, "open a channel to Fleet Command. Tell them we have a situation." "Yes, sir." Kevin Brooks looked at his captain with something like hope in his eyes. "Sir, what are we going to do?" Hayes turned to face his crew. These were good people. Brave people. They deserve to know the truth. "We are going to do what humans have always done when someone threatens our home," he said. "We are going to fight. And we are going to win." He looked back at the tactical display, at the massive alien warship that thought itself invincible. "Get me Admiral Cole and tell her to wake up the railgun teams. I think it is time we showed these Valorians what human weapons can do." The crew moved with renewed purpose. Fear was still there, but something else was growing alongside it: determination, defiance, the same stubborn refusal to surrender that had carried humanity through every crisis in their history. The Valorians had given them one day to submit. They were about to discover that one day was more than enough time for humans to prepare a very unpleasant surprise. Admiral Patricia Cole had not slept in 36 hours. Since the moment Captain Hayes sent his message about the alien ultimatum, she had been working nonstop. Every ship in the human fleet was being recalled. Every weapon system was being checked and loaded. Every crew member who could hold a post was being called to duty. She stood in the command center of Proxima Station, humanity's largest military outpost beyond Earth. The station hung in orbit around Proxima Centauri, 4 light-years from home. It was here that humanity had built their first true warships. It was here that they had developed the weapon that Patricia Cole hoped would save their species. The railgun. The concept was simple. So simple that ancient humans had thought of it centuries before they even had electricity. Take a piece of metal. Use electromagnetic coils to accelerate it to incredible speeds. Fire it at your enemy. No explosives needed. No fancy technology. Just pure kinetic energy. The physics were brutal and honest. A 1-kilogram object moving at 3% the speed of light carried more energy than a nuclear bomb. The human railguns could fire 2-meter-long tungsten slugs at 4% light speed. The math said that nothing should be able to survive a direct hit, but the math had never been tested against Valorian armor. Admiral Cole looked at the tactical display showing the alien ship. It was still sitting at the edge of the solar system, waiting for the humans to surrender. The Valorians were so confident in their invincibility that they had not even bothered to raise their shields or power their weapons. They simply sat there like a cat waiting for a mouse to come out of its hole. They had no idea that this mouse had claws. 27. Human warships gathered behind Proxima Station. using its bulk to hide from Valorian sensors. Captain Hayes and the Defiance were among them, along with every combat-capable vessel humanity possessed. It was not an impressive fleet by galactic standards. Most of the ships were small frigates and destroyers. Only 5 were heavy cruisers with the largest railgun systems, but every single one of them was armed and ready to fight. High Commander. Zorath grew impatient as the deadline approached. He had expected the humans to send terrified diplomats begging for mercy. Instead, there was only silence. His sensors showed the human ships gathering near a space station, but he dismissed this as a pathetic attempt at defense. Perhaps they meant to make a final stand. How entertaining. Sub-Commander Velix, Zorath said to his second-in-command, prepare the fleet for combat operations. It seems these primitives wish to die with some dignity. We shall grant them that much. Yes, High Commander. Should I raise shields? Zorath made a sound that was the Valorian equivalent of laughter. Against these creatures? Their weapons could not scratch our hull if they fired for 1,000 years. No, let them see that we do not even consider them a threat. It will make their despair all the sweeter. The Eternal Conquest moved forward, its massive engines pushing it toward Proxima Station. Behind it, the stars stretched and warped as the ship accelerated. Zorath watched the human fleet on his display. They were forming a defensive line, spreading out to present multiple targets. A decent tactic for primitives, he admitted. It would not save them. On the bridge of the Defiance, Captain Hayes watched the alien ship approach. His heart was pounding, but his hands were steady. He had done everything he could. Now it was time to see if human engineering could match 12,000 years of Valorian dominance. All ships, this is Admiral Cole, the fleet-wide channel crackled. Hold your positions. Wait for my command. We get one chance at this, people. Make it count. Kevin Brooks had his hands on the weapons console. The railgun was charged and ready. A single tungsten slug sat in the firing chamber, 2 meters of solid metal that weighed nearly 300 kilograms. In a few seconds, it would either save humanity or prove that they never stood a chance. The Eternal Conquest came within range. All ships, Admiral Cole's voice was calm and clear. Fire! 27 railguns fired simultaneously. The electromagnetic coils along each ship's hull hummed with power as they accelerated their projectiles to impossible speeds. The slugs left their barrels in less than a millisecond, moving so fast that they were invisible to the naked eye. Sub-Commander Velix saw the flash of the human weapons on his display. He opened his mouth to make a dismissive comment about primitive technology. He never got the chance. The first slug hit the Eternal Conquest just forward of the main reactor. It struck the crystalline neutronium armor, the same armor that had withstood plasma, bombardments and nuclear strikes and antimatter detonations across 1,000 battlefields. The armor shattered, not cracked, not dented, shattered. The tungsten slug punched through 3 meters of the strongest material in the known galaxy like it was made of glass. It continued through the ship, tearing through deck after deck, destroying everything in its path. It exited through the other side of the hull, taking a significant portion of the engineering section with it. Zorath stared at the damage reports in complete disbelief. Alarms screamed throughout the ship. Crew members were dying by the hundreds. Atmosphere was venting into space from wounds that should have been impossible. High Commander, Velix shouted over the chaos. Hull breach on decks 7 through 19. Reactor containment is failing. We have lost primary weapons control. That is impossible, Zorath whispered. Nothing can penetrate our armor. Nothing. But the evidence was all around him. His invincible ship was dying. On the Defiance, Kevin Brooks checked his display and allowed himself a small smile. Direct hit, Captain. The target is venting atmosphere. Significant internal damage detected. Captain Hayes felt a wave of relief wash over him, but he kept his expression calm. The battle was not over yet. All ships, Admiral Cole commanded. Weapons free. Continue firing until that ship is dead. The human fleet unleashed everything they had. Railgun slugs streaked through the void, one after another, each one finding its mark. The Eternal Conquest tried to flee, but it was too slow, too damaged, too surprised. The ship that had conquered worlds broke apart under the assault. Its reactor finally gave out, and the explosion lit up the darkness of space like a small sun. When the light faded, there was nothing left but debris and dust. The battle had lasted 14 minutes. Captain Hayes looked at the expanding cloud of wreckage that had once been the most powerful warship in the Valorian fleet. Around him, his crew was cheering, hugging each other, crying with relief. They had done the impossible. They had won, but Hayes knew this was only the beginning. The Valorians would send more ships, many more. And when they did, humanity would need to be ready. He opened a channel to the fleet. Good work, everyone. But do not celebrate too long. This was just the first round. The real fight is coming. Somewhere across the galaxy, the Valorian Dominion was about to learn that their 12,000 years of dominance had just come to an end. A small, primitive species from an unremarkable world had done what no one else had ever managed. They had found a way to kill the unkillable, and they were just getting started. The news of the Eternal Conquest's destruction spread across the galaxy faster than any ship could travel. Every species with access to the Galactic Communication Network heard the story within hours. A single Valorian battlecruiser, one of the most powerful warships ever built, had been torn apart by a species that most civilizations had never even heard of. The humans had done what everyone believed was impossible. In the crystalline halls of the Valorian Senate on their homeworld, chaos erupted. Senators shouted at each other, their mandibles clicking so fast that the translators could barely keep up. Some demanded immediate retaliation. Others called for caution. A few, the oldest and wisest among them, sat in stunned silence as they tried to understand how everything they knew about warfare had just been proven wrong. High Admiral Korvax stood before the assembly. He was the supreme commander of all Dominion military forces, a position he had held for over 300 years. His exoskeleton was covered in medals and honors from countless victories. He had never known defeat. He had never even considered the possibility. Now he was being forced to explain how a single primitive species had destroyed one of his finest ships. The humans used kinetic projectiles, he said, his voice carefully controlled. Simple metal slugs accelerated to extreme velocities. Our armor was designed to absorb and disperse energy-based attacks. It was not built to withstand focused kinetic impacts of this magnitude. Senator Morales, one of the oldest members of the assembly, leaned forward. You are telling us that our invincible armor, the foundation of our military dominance for 12,000 years, can be defeated by throwing rocks very fast? Korvax's mandibles twitched with barely suppressed anger. That is an oversimplification, is it? Because from where I sit it sounds like we have spent millennia perfecting defenses against the wrong kind of weapon. And now a species that learned to fly less than 2 centuries ago has exposed our greatest weakness to the entire galaxy. The chamber fell silent. Every senator understood what Morales was saying. The Valorian Dominion had maintained control through fear. Other species submitted because they believed resistance was futile. But if the humans could defeat Valorian armor, then that belief was shattered. And once fear disappeared, rebellion would follow across the galaxy. Other species were already beginning to whisper. The Nethians had been conquered by the Dominion 8,000 years ago. Their world had been stripped of resources, their people forced to work in Valorian factories and mines. Generations had lived and died under the boot of their oppressors, always believing that freedom was impossible. Now, in secret meeting places hidden from Valorian surveillance, Nethian leaders gathered to discuss what they had heard. Elder Vornis, the closest thing the Nethians had to a resistance leader, addressed his followers. The humans have shown us that the Valorians can bleed, he said. For the first time in 8,000 years, we have proof that our masters are not gods. They are mortal. They can be killed, but what can we do? Asked a younger Nethian. We have no weapons, no ships. The Valorians destroyed our military capacity centuries ago. Vornis smiled. something he had not done in a very long time. We may not have weapons, but the humans do, and I think it is time we reached out to our new friends. Similar conversations were happening on dozens of worlds. The Korathi, a peaceful species that had surrendered to the Dominion without a fight, began secretly contacting human diplomats. The Sulari Collective, a neutral trading federation that had always stayed out of galactic politics, quietly started increasing their orders for human-manufactured goods. Everyone wanted to be on the right side of history, and suddenly the right side looked like it might be the human side. On Earth, the celebration over the victory at Proxima was short-lived. Admiral Patricia Cole called an emergency meeting of the United Nations Space Command. Every senior military and political leader attended, either in person or through holographic projection. The mood was tense despite their recent success. "The Valorians will retaliate," Admiral Cole said, her voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. "We destroyed one ship. They have over 6,000. We hurt their pride, and they will not let that stand." General Nathan Price, head of weapons development, nodded grimly. "Our current fleet is not enough. We have 42 combat-capable vessels. Even with our railguns, we cannot fight a war of attrition against those numbers." "Then we need more ships," said Secretary General Antonio Reyes, the highest civilian authority in the room. "And bigger guns?" Dr. Samuel Wright stepped forward. He was a thin man in his 60s with wild gray hair and the kind of brilliant mind that only comes along once in a generation. He had designed the original railgun system. Now he had something even more impressive to show them. "We have been working on a new class of warship," he said, activating a holographic display. A massive vessel appeared, long and sleek, with a single enormous barrel running almost its entire length. "We call it the Decimator class. It is essentially one giant railgun with engines and life support attached." "How big?" Admiral Cole asked. 2 kilometers long. "The main gun can accelerate a projectile to 12% the speed of light. At that velocity, a single shot carries more energy than the largest nuclear weapon ever built on Earth." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed what they were hearing. "How long to build one?" General Price asked. 6 months for the first one. "After that, we can speed up production as we refine the process." Secretary General Reyes looked around the room. "Then we build them. As many as we can, as fast as we can. And while we are building, we reach out to other species. The Valorians have made a lot of enemies over the past 12,000 years. It is time we started making friends." The decision was made. Humanity would not hide. They would not run. They would prepare for the coming war, and they would find allies among the stars. 3 days later, a small human diplomatic ship left Earth on a mission that would change the course of galactic history. On board was Grace Sullivan, a 45-year-old diplomat with a gift for languages and an unshakable belief in the power of cooperation. Her destination was the Nephian homeworld, a place no human had ever visited. She carried a simple message, one that would resonate with every oppressed species in the galaxy. The Dominion told you that resistance was impossible. We just proved them wrong. Stand with us, and we will prove it again. Together we can be free. The Nethians listened. And for the first time in 8,000 years, they began to hope. 6 months had passed since the battle at Proxima Station. 6 months of frantic preparation, sleepless nights, and desperate hope. Humanity had worked harder than they had ever worked before. Every shipyard was running at full capacity. Every factory was producing weapons and ammunition. Every scientist was searching for new ways to hurt the enemy that was coming for them. And now that enemy had arrived, High Admiral Korvax stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion's Wrath. Around him, 200 warships stretched across the void like a wall of metal and death. Each one was armored with triple-layered crystalline neutronium, a new design created specifically to counter the human railguns. The engineers had assured him that 3 layers would be enough to stop even the fastest projectile. Korvax was not so certain. He had watched the recordings from the Eternal Conquest. He had seen how easily the human weapons had torn through armor that was supposed to be invincible. He would not make the same mistake Zorith had made. He would not underestimate these primitives. "All ships," he commanded, "raise shields to maximum, weapons charged and ready. We advance in formation. No ship breaks rank for any reason." The Valorian fleet moved toward human space like a slow-moving tide of destruction. At the edge of the solar system, the human fleet waited. Commodore Daniel Hayes, recently promoted after his performance at Proxima, commanded the defensive line from the bridge of the Defiance. His fleet had grown to 63 vessels, almost double what they had 6 months ago. But more importantly, they had completed the first 3 Decimator-class dreadnoughts. The largest of these ships was called the Retribution. It hung in space like a metal spear, 2 kilometers of pure killing power. Its main gun could fire a tungsten slug at 12% the speed of light. The energy released on impact would be equivalent to a small nuclear explosion. Hayes had seen the test firings. He had watched asteroids simply cease to exist when the Retribution hit them. Today, they would find out if it worked against Valorian armor. "Commodore," Lieutenant Maria Gonzalez said from her station, "the Valorian fleet is entering weapons range." 200 ships confirmed. Hayes nodded slowly. The odds were not good. 3-1 against, even with the decimators. But they had advantages the Valorians did not know about. "Signal the fleet. All ships hold position until my command. Let them come to us." Admiral Korvax watched the human fleet on his tactical display. They were not running. They were not even trying to maneuver. They simply sat there waiting. Either they were very brave or very foolish. Perhaps both. "The humans are within optimal plasma range," Sub-Commander Velix reported. "Shall the first give the order to fire?" "Not yet. Continue advancing. I want to see what they do." The 2 fleets drew closer. Tension filled the bridge of every ship on both sides. Fingers hovered over firing controls. Hearts pounded in chests. Everyone knew that the next few minutes would decide the fate of entire civilizations. Hayes watched the range counter tick down. 9,000 kilometers, 8,000, 7,000. "Commodore," Kevin Brooks said, his voice tight with anticipation, "the decimators are requesting permission to fire." "Not yet. 6,000 kilometers, 5,000. "Sir, they are almost in plasma range." "If we wait much longer," I said, "not yet." 4,000 kilometers. 3,000. Korvax allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The humans were paralyzed with fear. They had waited too long to fire. Now his ships were close enough to use their plasma cannons. And at this range, even primitive human ships would not survive for long. "All ships," he commanded, "open fire." 200 Valorian warships unleashed their weapons simultaneously. Brilliant streams of superheated plasma shot across the void, turning the darkness into a storm of fire and light. Hayes watched the plasma coming toward his fleet. At this range, his ships had about 4 seconds before impact. It was enough. "All ships, execute evasive pattern Omega." Decimators, fire at will. The human fleet scattered like leaves in a wind. Their ships were smaller and faster than the Valorian vessels, and they had spent months practicing exactly this maneuver. Most of the plasma fire missed completely. A few shots grazed human ships, burning away armor but not causing critical damage, and then the decimators fired 3 tungsten slugs. Each one, moving at 12% the speed of light, crossed the distance between the fleets in less than a heartbeat. They struck the lead Valorian ships with the force of colliding moons. The triple-layered armor held for exactly 1/10 of a second. Then it shattered like everything else the humans had shot. The slugs continued through the ships, exiting the other side and striking the vessels behind them. 2 ships died from a single shot. The 3rd slug hit the Dominion's Wrath directly amidships. Korvax was thrown from his feet as his flagship shuddered under the impact. Alarms screamed, lights flickered. Damage reports flooded in from across the ship. Hull breach on decks 12 through 31. Primary reactor offline, secondary systems failing. The High Admiral pulled himself upright and stared at the tactical display in disbelief. 6 of his ships were already destroyed. More were heavily damaged. And the humans were not done. "All ships," Hayes commanded, "weapons free. Hit them with everything we have." The human fleet unleashed a storm of railgun fire. Tungsten slugs tore through the Valorian formation, punching through armor that was supposed to stop them, destroying ships that were supposed to be invincible. The Valorians tried to return fire, but the humans were too fast, too agile. They danced between the plasma blasts, always moving, always firing. Korvax watched his fleet die around him. 80 ships destroyed in the first 10 minutes. Then 100. Then 120. "High Admiral," Velix shouted over the chaos. "We must retreat. If we stay, we will lose everything," Korvax wanted to argue. He wanted to keep fighting, to destroy these impudent primitives who dared to challenge the Dominion. But he was not a fool. He knew when a battle was lost. "All ships, emergency retreat. Fall back to Valorian space." The surviving Valorian ships turned and fled. The humans pursued for a while, destroying a few more stragglers, but eventually let them go. They had made their point. When the battle was over, Korvax counted his losses. 87 ships destroyed. Another 43 heavily damaged. More than 60,000 Valorian soldiers dead, and humanity had lost only 11 ships on the bridge of the Defiance. Hayes allowed himself a moment to breathe. They had won? Against all odds, they had won again, but he knew this was not the end. The Valorians would not give up after 2 defeats. They would come back with more ships, more weapons, more determination to crush the species that had humiliated them, unless humanity struck first. "Get me Admiral Cole," he said quietly. "It is time we took this fight to their doorstep." 3 months later, a combined fleet of human and Nethian vessels appeared in orbit above. Valorian Prime. The war for the galaxy had truly begun. Valorian Prime was the jewel of the Dominion. It was a world of towering crystal spires and floating cities, of ancient temples and vast palaces that had stood for thousands of years. 12 billion Valorians lived on its surface. Most of them civilians who had never known war, who had grown up believing their empire was eternal and untouchable. That belief died the moment the human fleet appeared in their sky. Commodore Hayes stood on the bridge of the Defiance, looking down at the planet that had terrorized the galaxy for 12,000 years. Beside his ship floated the rest of the human fleet, now numbering over 100 vessels. And alongside them were 30 Nethian ships, old freighters and transports that had been hastily armed with human railguns. They were not much, but they represented something far more important than firepower. They represented hope. "Commodore," Maria Gonzalez said, "we are detecting massive energy signatures from the orbital defense platforms. They are charging weapons." Hayes nodded. The Valorians had built hundreds of defense platforms around their homeworld, each one bristling with plasma cannons and missile launchers. In any normal battle, they would have been nearly impossible to defeat, but this was not a normal battle. "Signal the retribution. Tell Captain Morris to take out those platforms." The Decimator-class dreadnought moved forward, its massive form blocking out the stars. Captain Angela Morris, a stern woman with short black hair and ice-cold nerves, sat in the command chair and watched the defense platforms on her display. "Main gun charged and ready," her weapons officer reported. "Fire!" The Retribution's railgun roared to life. A tungsten slug the size of a car shot forward at 12% the speed of light. It struck the largest defense platform and kept going, tearing through it and hitting the platform behind it. Both structures exploded in balls of fire and debris. The Retribution fired again, and again, and again. Within 20 minutes, every orbital defense platform around Valorian Prime had been reduced to scrap metal on the surface. Panic spread through the population. Civilians ran through the streets, screaming and crying. The military tried to maintain order, but there was nothing they could do. Their fleet had been broken. Their defenses had been destroyed. For the first time in their history, the Valorians were completely helpless. In the Grand Palace at the center of the capital city, Prime Minister Korthax watched the destruction through a massive window. He was old, even by Valorian standards, and he had spent his entire life believing in the superiority of his species. Now he was watching that belief crumble before his eyes. "Prime Minister," an aide said nervously, "the humans are hailing us." "They wish to speak with you?" Korthax closed his compound eyes for a moment. He thought about ordering his remaining forces to fight to the last soldier. He thought about refusing to surrender, about making the humans pay for every meter of ground they took, but he also thought about the 12 billion civilians on his world. He thought about the children who had done nothing wrong except be born into an empire that had made too many enemies. "Put them through," he said quietly. The face of Commodore Hayes appeared on the screen. He was calm, his expression unreadable. "Prime Minister Korthax. I am Commodore Daniel Hayes of the United Nations Space Command. I am here to discuss the terms of your surrender." Korthax felt a flash of anger. "Surrender? You expect us to simply give up everything we have built? I expect you to look at what remains of your fleet and your defenses and make a rational decision. You have no ships left that can threaten us. Your orbital platforms are gone? If we wanted to, we could reduce your cities to rubble from orbit. Your people would die by the billions, and there would be nothing you could do to stop it." The Prime Minister said nothing. He knew the human was right. "But we are not here to commit genocide," Hayes continued. "We are here to end a war that your species started. We are here to free the species you have enslaved. And we are here to make sure that no one else ever has to live in fear of Valorian conquest again. What are your terms?" Hayes had thought about this moment for a long time. He had imagined all the things he could demand, all the ways he could punish the Valorians for their centuries of cruelty. But in the end, he had decided that revenge was not worth the cost. Unconditional surrender of all military forces, the immediate release of all enslaved species, the dismantling of your war machine. Your ships will be decommissioned. Your weapons factories will be converted to civilian use. You will pay reparations to every species you have harmed. And if we refuse? Hayes looked at the Prime Minister with eyes that had seen too much death. "Then we will do what we came here to do. But I hope you will not force us to make that choice. Enough people have died already." Korthax was silent for a long moment. He looked out the window at his beautiful world, at the spires and palaces that his ancestors had built over thousands of years. He thought about his children and his grandchildren. He thought about what kind of future they would have if he chose to keep fighting. "We accept your terms," he said finally. "The Valorian Dominion surrenders." The news spread across the galaxy like a wave of light. On Nethia, crowds filled the streets, dancing and singing songs that had been forbidden for 8,000 years. On Korath, families embraced each other and wept with joy. On 100 other worlds, beings who had lived their entire lives as slaves suddenly realized that they were free. Grace Sullivan worked for months to establish the Galactic Alliance, a new government based on principles that humans had fought and died for throughout their history. Every species would have a voice. Every world would be represented. No one would ever be conquered again. It was not perfect. Nothing ever was. There were arguments and disagreements, old hatreds that took generations to heal. But slowly, carefully, the galaxy began to rebuild itself into something better than it had been before, years later. Admiral Daniel Hayes retired to a small house on the coast of California. He spent his days fishing and reading, enjoying the peace that he had helped to create. Sometimes his granddaughter Elizabeth would visit him. She had graduated from the Space Command Academy, at the top of her class, and was already making a name for herself as a brilliant young officer. One evening, as they sat on his porch watching the sun set over the ocean, she asked him what he was thinking about. "I am thinking about how they called us primitive," he said. "How they looked at our ships and our weapons and saw nothing but relics from a backwards world. How they covered themselves in armor and thought that made them invincible. And what did you learn from that?" He smiled, the same calm smile he had worn on the bridge of the Defiance all those years ago. "I learned that it does not matter how strong your armor is. It does not matter how advanced your technology is. What matters is whether you have the courage to keep fighting when everything seems hopeless. What matters is whether you stand with your friends when they need you. What matters is whether you are willing to do whatever it takes to protect the people you love." He looked up at the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. The Valorians forgot that. and that is why they lost. Elizabeth followed his gaze to the heavens, where 1,000 worlds now lived in peace under the protection of the Galactic Alliance. Do you think there will ever be another war like that? Hayes was quiet for a moment. Maybe. The galaxy is a big place, and there are always those who want to take what others have built. But if that day comes, humanity will be ready. We always are. Above them, the stars glittered with the light of 1,000,000 suns, watching over a galaxy that had finally learned what humans had always known. Freedom was worth fighting for, and humans never stopped fighting.